Hi, my name is Mandy Cervantes, and I'm going to be doing a rhetorical analysis on an article that I personally love that's in the New Yorker. First, I want to talk about what I'm going to be focusing on today. I'm going to start with talking about the situation, a little bit of background on the actual piece, who the author is, how I find him credible, the author's overall position, at least my opinion in his overall position, the audience that he is trying to portray the article to, and the main idea of the piece. So let's get started. Before I show you the thing. There we go. So the name of the article is called "Small Changes: Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted." It's obviously, you could see here, it's written October 4th, 2010. The reason I chose this article is because even though it's written in 2010, I still find it incredibly relevant today. Uh, it talks about, you can see in the first paragraph, the civil rights movement, the sit-ins that happened in North Carolina, and so just to think about, the different activist movements we have today. We have Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, the election that's obviously sparking a lot of activists, and just how different those movements are from the civil rights movement and the different movements that happened in the past. And so it's what he talks about. It's one of my favorite topics. And so, yeah, let's just give you a little background on Malcolm Gladwell. He If you go to the bottom of most articles, they normally give you a little snippet of the person. This is, obviously a little bit of a cartoon version of him. It's, he got his little wild hairstyle here that he still has today. And so he's been a staff writer since 1996. And I just want to pull up his little Wikipedia to give you a little bit more background. He's written 5 novels that have all been on the New York bestseller list, and all 5 are pretty much my favorites as well. Tipping Point to be the main favorite. How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, Blink, Outliers, What the Dog Saw, David and Goliath. All of them have something to do with sociology, psychology, and social psych. And they're all very interesting topics to think about, and he gets you to think about them in just a factual way, but also just like a fun way with good examples, good backstories. Um, and it's one of the reasons he's one of my favorite writers even today, and it's one of the reasons I love talking about him. The way he writes is, it makes you really just trust his judgment, and he gives you enough facts without overloading you, and he gives you enough story to make you really just put in perspective. And so that's why I've chosen this actual piece, "Small Changes: Why the Revolution Will Not Be Tweeted." So the overall position that, at least in my opinion, he holds is that even though movements have changed, but the actual act of getting into a movement is the same, it's different. The revolution will not be tweeted is something that, he talks about in the piece, and it won't, in my opinion at least, and obviously in his opinion, it won't be tweeted. And he talks about this after he talks about the civil rights movement and how it really came to be. So he doesn't just hit you with his opinion right away. He leads into it, talking about the civil rights movement, how it came to be, how these 5 or so college students got together and decided to do this sit-in. It just happened. They're 5 friends, and then they went off and got 5 friends each, and then their 5 friends got 5 friends each, and all of a sudden you have hundreds and thousands of people that know about this sit-in and that are participating in the sit-in. And so he talks about how that is really. And so he talks about Facebook and Twitter and how we sort of in our minds see this as the same thing. I personally have 100 or so Twitter followers, 100 and so Facebook friends, but what he talks about, and I think that a lot of people don't really see, is that even though we have all these hundreds and thousands of friends on our Facebook and Twitter and our social media, how many of them do we actually really reach? And it's something he talks about towards the middle as well. The civil rights movement was so strong, and he talks about it, is they have strong ties. And these strong ties are what makes them so effective in getting so many people and getting their message really out there. And so how social media, even though it makes it easier to get our word out, it's not exactly as effective unless you're really online or unless you're actively online. I know a lot of people at least a lot of my friends, they have social media, but very rarely do they actually act on it or use it. Some of them use it a lot more than others, but the way social media especially is today is it's really geared towards our own personal interests. So when you go on Facebook and you have advertisements geared towards you, you don't really see a lot of different opinions. For example, if you're a Democrat, Facebook actually recognizes that, and they will only show you Democratic articles that are geared towards Democratic um, messages, and vice versa for Republicans. So he talks about how, even though the internet is, being huge, and how he talks about the some successful ways that, the that social media has really taken off, Arab Springs being one of them. Um, but the real reason that he makes his opinion known is that it he talks about strong ties and weak ties, the strong tie phenomenon that obviously he didn't discover, but this person did. And so, this sociologist, yes. And how, even though we have all of these, Facebook, Twitter, the social media friends, they're not a very strong tie. Yes, we have them, but how many of them do we actually reach? And I think a really good example of this is to document how many likes do you really get, I guess, is a pretty good example. Personally, I have, hundreds of friends, but I get maybe 20 likes. So I'm maybe reaching 20 people that actively participate in whatever I am sharing. Not that I share a lot of relevant things anyway, but that's beside the point. He talks about these strong ties as the reason why the civil rights movement really took off. Like I talked about previously, the five friends got five friends that got five friends, and it became this huge thing that, you know, why aren't you at the luncheon? And in social media, it's different. You can, it's easier to hide behind a computer screen. They're not gonna, no one's gonna go up to you and say, why didn't you like this page? Or why didn't you like this? Or why didn't you share that? It's more personal and it's more individual, I would say. And your social media friends, I think he talks about, are considered weak ties. And so I think that's a huge part of the article in talking about how social media is changing our social change. And so, the dragonfly effect, quick, effective, powerful ways to use social media to drive social change. And so it does happen. It is a real thing. And he talks about another example is this person who needed a bone marrow transplant. A friend of his sent out an email, and it became this huge, phenomenon that he ended up finding a match, which is very rare. Um, through social media. So he does talk about ways that social media does help and does change, but he, at the end, really says that even though it'll change, it's not always a guarantee to change. The way we do social media today, it's a great way to connect with other people that, you never would have otherwise known. And I think that's a huge, he talks to that about that as well. It's a huge, um, ally to activist movements. You can talk to people from different states and different countries about the issues that you face, and you can get each other together and get together, and it's a lot easier, with Facebook events and Twitter and just getting everyone together. But at the same time, it also makes it easier to not get those numbers since you're really just, inviting yourself via Facebook or via, email. It's easier not to show up because there's no face to identify, to really just like connect it to. Um, which is something that the civil rights movement really had. If your five friends that you wanted to be there didn't show up, you'd obviously notice. Versus a Facebook event where if you were invited, it wouldn't really phase you if they didn't show up because there're just either so many of them or you don't know them personally. And so again, with the strong tie, weak tie idea. And he talks about how the movement was like a fever, and how even though Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, the election, they're very strong opinions today and very active activist movements. It's not really, it's sort of becoming slowly like a fever, at least in my opinion, I would say. but it's not the way they're connecting is through social media, but also through communities. So it's still using that civil rights movement mentality of we need these strong ties versus, okay, we can post on a Facebook page and I can personally share an opinion, but who am I really reaching? I'm reaching maybe 20 plus people, and those are 20 plus people that um, I may not have reached before, but it's still a slow growing movement in terms of social media. And it's getting bigger, not to say that it's not big enough, but it's getting bigger. People are finally getting together with communities and through their communities, and really it's taking off. So I think if Malcolm Gladwell were maybe to write this piece again, he would talk about those movements and talk about how they're utilizing it. And I would love to read about that. And so the audience he's trying to reach. I think the audience he's personally trying to reach would be um, probably either at this time it was probably not really millennials because at this time we were still, growing up a little bit and still getting used to social media, so it's still becoming fairly new. I would say maybe an older crowd that's trying to start their activist movements, whoever was involved during activist movements at this time. And I think if he were to rewrite this piece, it would be geared toward millennials that are always online and I think always connected in some way. And I think it would sound maybe a little bit differently because of our need to connect and how many different platforms we can do that. And so maybe the revolution might not be tweeted, but it definitely will be Snapchatted and videotaped and online by, the end of the day. So I think the audience he's trying to reach here would just be those who believe that social media is taking over activist movements. The main idea of the piece, I would say, would be just to prove, in his opinion, that even though social media and basically the internet, is taking off, it will never replace human connection. It will never replace the idea that strong ties are more effective than those weak ties. And I think it's huge to really um, say that, especially nowadays, where we think social media is just this huge way of thinking. And so, um, yeah, and so that's why I think that this piece is still relevant today, even though it was written, 6 plus years ago. So, thank you for joining me, and I hope that you will consider, my opinion on why the revolution will not be tweeted. Thank you.